Yeah, and I didn't get it. I guess that was on purpose.
You didn't send anything to, you were a bit afraid that we actually have a lawyer.
When you have a lawyer here, they didn't get the release
in the
form.
spam, So
That's in the spam, yeah.
Exactly. I'm definitely going to look. No, don't worry about it. I was just curious about this meal that you're offering here.
Yes.
Very compatible to podcasting.
Yeah, it's after work.
Yeah.
But we were talking about then, how do
eating chips in the microphone.
How do you eat chips on the podcast? And now for the listeners, be aware.
So, I think the sound could be relaxing in some ways.
Could you actually fall asleep to listen to someone eat chips?
Instead of listening to whales.
Then we switch to meat instead.
Exactly.
In Spotify, we actually have this kind of playlist where you actually use them to fall asleep. But I have never heard anything where a person eats chips and falls asleep.
No, that's rainforest I get. Chips, I don't really get that point.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We should try it.
Maybe. Awesome. Evelina Antilla, very welcome to this podcast. It's a true pleasure to have you here. We've known each other for some time.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to share some experience from Almedalen or whatnot. And Fanta and Rosé, you've been there with Gordon, me and others. And,
exactly.
Are you part of the Fanta Rosé crew?
Oh, I like it, yes. Yeah.
I hope we don't have any sommeliers listening into this, but other than that, it's truly a fun thing. But it was no Almedalen this year.
Exactly.
Luckily or not? Or
sorry?
Do you miss it, or would you have?
Definitely. I'm not sure if we will have one this summer.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? But we can have some Fanta and Rosé otherwise.
Good point.
Yeah.
Awesome. But let's start perhaps a bit. Who is Evelina? How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, so I'm 33 years old. I'm from Stockholm. I'm a mother of 2 kids. And I'm a colleague of yours.
Yes.
Working at Peltarion. I've been doing that for nearly 4 years now.
Yeah, almost same time as me, I think.
Yeah, I think you were a bit before me.
Yeah.
Do you know your employee number at Peltarion? Like 10, 15?
No, it's more like 20-something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was early days.
It was. Back in 2017.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. But and if we were to go through, you have done so many cool stuff, and I know you're a bit humble, so you don't want to say about the nice things, but I can brag for you instead, perhaps, and
Oh, nice.
so you don't have to do it yourself. But you've been elected to one of the super talents by Veckans Affärer, etc., in 2019 and so forth. But still, going back a bit from the beginning, and you obviously are a lawyer.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can just start a bit about, how that got started and what brought you into that field.
Yeah, so actually I've been thinking about that question, actually because I've been writing a book around why you should become a lawyer, which actually got me thinking about it. Why did I do that? And I went to law school straight after high school. And surely I had my reasons for it, but I think back then I couldn't put it into words. And actually I was considering a career as an engineer as well, and actually applied to KTH. But in the end I chose law, and I think it goes back to my background. So I'm from Stockholm, I'm from a suburb just south outside of Stockholm. And the area where I grew up was quite... it was a lot of trouble, not for me personally, but the area was had a lot of problems.
Which area was that?
Haninge.
Yes.
And hopefully, I hope it's better now. But what I saw, and quite early in my age, was the injustice in society. So just realizing that people don't have the same opportunities. So I wanted to do something about it, and I wanted tools and context to do that. So I think that brought me into the law field. And in the very beginning, I saw myself as a lawyer in court, defending people.
Watching American shows, or
yeah,
actually,
of course. I mean, of course.
Did you have a favorite American show?
Yeah, I mean, I liked Elle McBeal. Perhaps
Elle
that
McBeal, classic.
tells something about my age, although I think I'm still young. But
You're the youngest one here, so yeah.
Yeah.
you're
Oh,
still young, yes.
cool, nice. Gonna put that on my resume. Yeah, but to this date, I haven't been in court defending people, I should say. And I mean, you never know. I might do that in the future. But what actually came up to me was that you can do a lot of things with law. And not necessarily within criminal law. So, I mean, even working in business law could actually do or entail good stuff when it comes to society.
Cool. So that brought you into law school, and for people that don't know, you got a juridisk Kand, right? Or what was it?
Exactly. At that time, it was called jurkand.
Yeah.
Now I think they say juristexamen, but it's basically the same thing. It's 4.5 years of studies. And I went to Stockholm University. And at that time, I was really into sports. I still am.
Really?
Yeah.
What kind of sports? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so football or soccer, depending on
where in the world.
Yeah, where in the world you are, and also floorball, like innebandy. Yes, exactly. So I was not like 100% considering a career as an athlete. I wish, but I was practicing a lot. So
on what level? What was your claim of fame in soccer and football?
I mean, I wish I could say like the highest league, but it wasn't. But like the second best.
Second best in damlaget.
Exactly.
In the seniors.
But I mean, I was doing it because it was fun.
Yeah.
So it was really nice to still be in Stockholm and study. But when I started working, I realized like I needed to see something else. And then I got the opportunity through my former employer to work in New York. So
was that Mannheimer? Or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah. So Mannheimer Swartling. It's one of the biggest law firms in Scandinavia, and they have an office in New York. So I went there for a year.
Great adventure.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
And what was your field? What was your focus when you were in New York?
It was basically everything related to business. So everything from intellectual property to mergers and acquisitions, IT, tech. And I think that was the very beginning of my tech journey. And also being in New York, I mean, it's a great city. There's a lot of like startups.
You still think that? Or?
I mean, yeah, of course, they do have their problems, but I miss New York a lot. Yes.
New York has a pulse, the Big Apple, something like
yeah.
that.
I've been a lot in New York. I must say, I don't want to go back there.
Really?
No, not even as a tourist. No. I love to go to. I'm not sure I would
Canada
like.
is much nicer.
But
what was the? I mean, why is that?
It's horrible. It smells bad. You have garbage on the streets. It's a mess everywhere.
I think there is some sort of pulse or energy in that city, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yes.
I'm not sure I would like to live in that city, but to go there once in a while, I think it's.
Compared to other places in the world, I would put U.S. in general very low in my list, actually.
But then we can disagree on this one.
Exactly. We don't need to be in agreement in everything. Yeah, but I think that sparked something. So when I came back to Stockholm, I still worked at Mannheimer, but I was like looking outside the law field, and I was actually considering leaving it because I felt that it's not super fun being a lawyer. Sorry, all lawyers. But
can you just elaborate a bit more? What's the negative side, so to speak? So,
I mean, obviously, it depends on your passion and interests, and I just think that I've come to realize that it's not my passion going through like laws and regulations. I like to see law as a enabler of things, and if you can use that tool in that sense. That's great, but sometimes you end up in it shouldn't be a blocker.
Right.
And also, if you are a lawyer within a company, for example, as I am now at Peltarion, I mean, it's a support function. And you need to understand that lawyers are supporters. And
I'm so eager to jump to the question
But
of
that-
regulations, pros and cons
Yeah,
now. But
exactly.
let's wait with that
keep-
for a
keep
second,
it.
I think.
But that can be great, and I think it's just it's not you, it's me. Like I've realized that perhaps I shouldn't be a lawyer.
But what sparked what
big
sparked
Oh
your
my
tech,
God, this is gonna be like I'm gonna hand in my resignation tomorrow.
but what sparked your tech interest? Can you sort of backtrack in New York? Was it the scene? Was it the type of clients you were, or what? Where was the tech interest sparked, so to speak?
It was actually in a running group. So I'd like to see myself as like a sporty, social, super active person. But what's really fun, at least I think that, is that during the pandemic, now that you've been basically in lockdown, I came to appreciate the low pace
Uh,
activities as well. Perhaps it's like something with age or maturity.
You're just 33 years old. You can't speak about age.
She can't pull the age card. The age card. She can't pull that yet. Sorry. 5 more years.
No, but so going back to New York, I mean, I was everywhere. And at that time I was 26, I was single. I mean, I didn't have anything that held me back. So I was just like, if anyone was asking me to, hey, join this running club, I'm there. I was the first to show up. So, and that was actually the spark to the tech scene, because the running group was run by a guy who was, I think he has started like several startups. And he had founded a company which had this running app, which basically, I think Spotify later on had a similar thing. It's related to the pace.
Yeah,
so,
of course. They had an adaptive.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the music BPM that fits with the running pace.
Yeah, exactly. So we were running in Central Park with like speakers and the app.
Yeah.
And it was great. And it was like 20, 30 people. And I think I was the only one working with like a boring job. Yeah, sorry.
Keep
I'm
putting
just
down your.
don't
no,
put it down.
Time.
yeah,
It's weird.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I shouldn't.
And you came back to Stockholm, and then what's the journey? How you and Peltarion found each other, so to speak?
Yeah, so I went back. I was doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. I was helping a lot of like tech companies with fundraising, but being on the other side. And then I have a friend of mine, Mikael Moreira. I think he's the best tech lawyer in town.
The best tech lawyer in town.
Yeah, he
You
should,
heard it here.
or VC lawyer. He should definitely have its appreciation post.
Yeah.
So he's a friend of mine, and he knew about Peltarion. I think it was like fundraising wise, and said that they are looking for a lawyer, a first lawyer to build up the legal department. And he knew that I were trying to get out of the legal field, but he said that if you wanted, I mean, this is a really cool company. You should have a second opinion or a second thought about this. And then I met with Peder, I think, which is, at that time he was HR director at Peltarion. And shortly thereafter I met with the two founders, Luca and Måns. And then I was just like, oh, this is so cool. And I really, really liked Luca and Måns. They are like genuinely nice people. And also, I thought it was interesting with AI. And to be honest, at that time...
Yeah, how much did you know about
no,
AI at that time?
Nothing, barely. But I mean, I went online, I read about it, and I realized that, I mean, this new technology will definitely bring much change in society.
Yeah.
It could be for good, it could be for bad, it could
And
be both.
regulation will not. We need to catch up.
Yeah,
and you
so
could
it's
sort
like
of see.
exactly
where this
super interesting, and being in that field that early, at least.
It is early.
Yeah, so I thought it was super exciting, and couldn't say no. so that was the start.
It is hard to say.
Regulatory lawyering combined with AI, it must be one of the key places to be.
Yeah, and I think it also came back to, why I in the first place went to law school, because I wanted to do something good, and I wanted to be able to have tools to change bad things in society and do it for the better. And then AI could be another tool for that.
Right. So, there are two ways to look at AI and law, I would say. One is basically using AI to improve law, right? Another is the law for AI, which is two different, completely different questions, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
two interesting questions to explore, actually.
Yeah.
Which
could
one?
be. Perhaps before that.
What's your take on it?
Oh, don't try to turn the tables on me.
I like
You
this.
started.
Let's start interviewing. He tries to get out of the question, and
Exactly.
I have too many opinions, but
we love it. We love opinions.
But before that, okay, so you didn't know that much about AI to start with.
No.
But if you were to compare perhaps what you thought AI was at that time and what you think today.
Yeah.
What's
I
the
think,
difference?
perhaps I'm a good example of what at least my opinion is of society today, because I think there's a lack of, education. It sounds like super broad, but understanding around AI, because at the moment, or sometimes I feel that we have insufficient information and that people don't really know what AI is and what it's not. And it goes back to education and awareness. So I think, this podcast is great, demystifying what AI is, and also talking about AI generally, taking it to a broader scene. And that's actually why I started my newsletter.
Right.
Same purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Same purpose.
So what newsletter is that?
So it's AI's Weekly. I'm part of Stockholm AI, which is a community here in Stockholm. I think actually it's one of the biggest communities in Europe, at least in the Nordics.
In terms of AI, you mean?
In terms of AI.
Yes.
Exactly. Sorry, I forgot that one. One bear in. But it's basically AI enthusiasts gathered together, and we have a lot of activities. Everything from reading groups to events.
It sounds like breeding group, but reading groups.
Reading groups, yes.
Good.
And events.
Meetups.
Meetups, everything. Of course, nowadays it's digitally.
Digital meetups.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm part of the board since May last year, and one of the reasons I got engaged with Stockholm AI is because, well, first of all, I think we need to improve the diversity in the AI field, and Stockholm AI, they do a lot of good things, and they have done things to improve diversity, but I wanted to be part and increase that. And then I thought about, okay, what can we do? Because in my book, action is the important part.
Speaks louder than words, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's so
words.
easy to have opinions about things. And
Yes.
I have opinions, and I've been one of those, just complain. But I think it's important to just ask yourself, okay, what can I do to improve this? And
we're trying all the time to find sound bites. Luca, the founder of Peltarion, said basically commit to deploy, which we are probably going to print a T-shirt with. Perhaps another one is something like
Action
that.
speaks louder than words.
Yeah.
So
it must be someone who said that before.
We all the guests we've had now. This is a joke, but it's actually quite serious. Trying to distill it down to a very concrete, simple principle or statement is a way to hammer things in. So commit to deploy is about go away from trying to do piloting, but really understand to take something to production. That's when you're really going to learn. Action speaks louder than words.
Yeah.
Is something about how we change and get ready for this.
Don't complain, just act, right? Or something like that.
Exactly. Well, we should have billboards.
And
something,
we're almost at the Nike and just do it. So.
But to go back to it, I think it's, if you have a voice, and I'm not sure my voice is the loudest, but at least I think I have something to say.
Sure.
then I think you have an obligation to use it. And that's what I want to do. I mean, my passion lies around diversity, women in tech, women in AI. And with this newsletter, what I want to achieve is twofold. First thing is demystifying AI as you do, and just show like use cases, what you can do with it, what it is, what it's not. And then I want to show role models and the whole spectra. Because I think role models is one of the key things to achieve a balance when it comes to diversity.
Yeah. So what you mean with that is basically here, I'm female, I'm a lawyer, I'm in the AI field. This is a role model for one way of going.
Yeah, and
AI.
it's not just to, to put myself on the newsletter. I want to put others in there.
No, and because by doing, like it's a little bit like, very similar actually, that we want to demystify AI with this podcast. We think the best way to do that is by casting guests and exploring these guests as role models for different perspectives of what AI will do for us or how we can work in AI field and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I guess you are then having you in your newsletter you will talk to different people or interview them as a way to frame.
Yeah.
This is Linda, and she's working with this, and she has this passion, and this is how she got into it. Look here, she did not go. She wasn't born an AI doctor, right? She started somewhere else, but she came this way. Yeah, this was her path.
That's the purpose, and a mix of like news, a mix of like interviews, including events, and I think it's super important to include the community. So what I'm trying to do is not only to curate this newsletter myself, but actually including more, because we all live in filter bubbles.
So, but I think let's promote AI Stockholm. What is AI Stockholm? Because I think it's a great community, and we want people to join communities. Yeah. So, what's the mission and purpose of AI Stockholm, and how did that start? So,
it started a couple of years ago. I can't remember the exact year, but it's driven by enthusiasts, people that are interested in the AI field. And I think historically it's been a lot of like engineers, tech people.
Tech nerds.
Tech
like
nerds.
Myself,
Tech nerds is an important part, but maybe not the whole part. But it's an important part.
But what we're moving towards now, and time will tell if this is a good path or not, is to include people beyond tech. Because I think that is super important when we're discussing like ethics, for example. Because we need different types of competences and skills. And tech people are super important. But it's also important with the other parts, economics, society, lawyers.
Yeah.
Cool.
And Goran is showing of the Stockholm.ai webpage.
Yeah, exactly.
So everybody can find more information on Stockholm.ai.
Yeah. And we are actually updating the website quite soon, because I don't think it's super updated yet.
But in short, it's a non-profit organization, right?
Yes.
That tries to promote and help people accelerate and understand AI in different ways.
Do you have any sponsorship, or how do you make it work?
Yes, we do have sponsors. If you're interested, you can email me afterwards.
Good.
But it's a non-profit, and one of the partners is actually Peltarion. Yeah.
Or sponsors, yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm eager to jump into the next topic.
Let's go there now.
And I'm trying to struggle which one. There's so many to choose from. But I think something you mentioned a bit before about I guess regulation in general should not be a blocker, you said.
Yeah.
And can you just start to elaborate a bit more? What do you mean with that?
Exactly. It's so if you are working as an in-house lawyer, for example, it's not fun to be the blocker and just say no. But I think it's...
And I can just share what I said before at the start. When I speak to you or ask you something, I try to avoid saying, is this okay to do? I wouldn't ask that, but instead I would ask, how can we solve this to make this possible?
But now let's start here, and then we have a tips and tricks with your internal lawyer.
Exactly.
How to speak to lawyers.
How to speak to lawyers. Tips and tricks with your privacy officer. Let's go there.
Exactly. But that's good. Yeah, but I think what people could do to help out lawyers to be enablers rather than blockers is actually involving them early on.
Early on is a key tip.
Yeah, exactly.
Tips and tricks, number one.
And it's also more fun as a lawyer to be part early on, because then you can be part of setting the strategy, be proactive, and if one way wouldn't work, then you can suggest another way, rather than come in late saying that, oh my God, this is illegal, you can't do that, that's super boring, and you're being the no-sayer. So be more proactive rather than reactive.
So one of the key strategies is to work with your regulatory topics or lawyering stuff proactively. If that's a simple
lawyering stuff.
that is simple enough, right?
Yeah, but I think actually I have to defend the field of law in some way, because you're putting it down a bit. So I'm going to take the opposite stance a bit now and trying to find a positive and why we need regulation, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very pro-regulation, especially for the AI field.
And I usually speak the opposite way. I usually speak against regulation because I think so many examples of regulation is bad, but I think without regulation it would be horribly as bad as well.
Yeah.
So there is two extremes. You can think of completely anarchistically, without regulation, and you can think completely over-regulated and a kind of Big Brother kind of society, which would be also bad. So the real problem is really to find the balance between the two, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not an easy task.
And I think one example, we always love to quote Elon Musk, I think, and at least I do.
We or you, exactly.
But one example,
I'm with him actually on this one. But he has the quotes lined up. I don't.
Yeah. But I think he often speaks. Elon Musk is very much speaking about pros of or a need for regulation in AI, and he compares it, for example, with the automotive or the seatbelt. Before in I guess 1950s or something, the whole automotive industry was really against the regulation of having seatbelts. To the point that it took 10 years, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed because the cars didn't have seatbelts in them. And then finally, after a long time, people started to understand perhaps we should have seatbelts, and actually is a good thing, and it doesn't really hurt the industry that much that we have seatbelts. They will still sell cars. But then you can go, we can go to GDPR and whatnot. But would you agree with that? I guess it's kind of a leading question, but to just give
serving it on a plate.
but do you think that kind of analogy between the automotive and seatbelt kind of regulations compared to AI regulation is useful in some way?
Yeah, and today there are a few players that truly uses AI. Yeah. What we've seen is a shift. Many companies are now looking into, exploring how can we use AI in practice. So, with that comes that people or companies are now actually thinking about ethics. And that is super, super good. Ethics and regulation. We need to take it seriously. Because... Well, going back to Elon Musk,
please.
We can do something now to make sure that AI models, systems are transparent, are explainable, but we need actively to put resources into it. And I think that's super important to make sure that the models are fair and secure. And how we will do that, it's a super hard question. I've been following the work that the EU Commission is doing and the high-level expert group.
Right.
And they've come up with suggestions. I think some of them are good, but then you can have comments about it as well. But I think I have so much to say about this, because sometimes it feels like people are desperate for regulation. And then we don't really know what regulation we need. and people tend to talk about AI as an object. It's not. Many people argue that it's a general purpose technology. Perhaps that's established now, that it's like electricity.
Yeah.
And
you mean AI is a general purpose technology similar to electricity?
Yeah,
for like 100 years
exactly.
ago or something?
Yeah. So I mean, we can't talk about it like an object. And AI is math. You can't just forbid math.
So isn't this one of the key topics here now? If we want to talk about regulations in AI and ethics in AI, it requires a certain level of understanding
Yes.
before we understand how to regulate. And I think this is one of the key problems, that the lawmakers sometimes, the regulators sometimes, they haven't really, they don't have the...
Oh my God, sorry.
The beer is spilling.
This was not on purpose. I
It's
must
okay,
say.
but
We need regulation on beer bottles.
but I think this is one of the things we are getting. I mean, like we have talked about this in other topics. In order to succeed with data and AI industrialization, we will need to understand intersectional innovation. We need to cross-pollinate whatever domain we are in with the data and AI domain.
Yeah.
So it then goes that you can't sit in the lawmaking domain and looking in from the outside on data and AI. You need to be exposed to it. You need to have experts. You need to work cross-functionally with people who can explain it to you. Because if you're on the outside looking in, you're not really understanding concretely what you're trying to regulate. That's my hypothesis.
And then we will get laws that are not fit for purpose.
That's the point, right? Or we will have good intentions like GDPR, but where the way we execute it has lost its meaning because we didn't really understand the purpose and how it could be done. And by the way,
That's debatable, I should say, though.
No, but
I mean, some people argue that GDPR is like a masterpiece.
But this is what I'm saying.
No, this is the topic to
Let's go here. Let's go here. Like, so we are talking about
masterpiece. I'm writing that
regulations fit for purpose, and now. Do you see how it gets red now?
Yeah, exactly.
So GDPR might be a masterpiece.
You said before we started that I won't put you in the corner. I feel cornered now.
But this is your field.
Yeah.
This should be okay.
Yeah.
No, but I think this is interesting because maybe the fundamental way GDPR was intended and even how it's framed when you read the law text, it's fantastic. But then somewhere along the lines, we have tried to interpret what it means and how to execute it. And extremely convoluted processes, or basically no to everything, has started to emerge. So the way we have now decided to interpret and use GDPR, and I actually have a very good anecdote of this because I've been working at Vattenfall and I've been working with Scania, and they are both taking GDPR extremely seriously. They are super professional. They have big lawyering team looking at this, but they are fundamentally looking at it differently.
Yeah, but so...
Which I find interesting then, right?
Yeah, but there is some interpretation issues when it comes to GDPR. Although it's like an EU law. That's problematic because...
But then it's not the masterpiece. Or could you do something that is not hard to interpret in these areas? Maybe that's even impossible.
So personally, I think that when it comes to AI and regulation, I don't believe in a regulation that is like fits everything, one size fits all.
No, but that's really important to understand.
Yeah, so I think that we need to look at the effects. And to be able to do that...
This is another quote, actually, because I think this was... the first time I heard it was actually from you, I think. What should we regulate? Techniques or effects of techniques?
Yeah.
That's a profound statement, by the way.
Yeah. So can you just elaborate a bit more on that? Because I think that's an important understanding to have.
Important, yes, and also hard. Because, I mean...
So give an example. I can just give an example. So let's take face recognition. It's a technique. Can be used for different, number of different purposes. A lot of them potentially with harmful intention or implications, but potentially also positive implications. And then the option is, should you simply say face recognition is forbidden, or should you say the application of using different types of face recognition, applications is forbidden? Is that what you mean with the effects of techniques, or what did you mean when you said regulate the effects of techniques, not the techniques themselves?
So, going back to the EU Commission's proposal, because one of the things they suggest is a risk-based approach.
Yes.
And I mean, that could be good, but it's also problematic because...
In so many ways.
In so many ways, yeah. Because, well, at least you need to assess what is risk, and also risk that could be, that could change over time. So applying AI in one sector may have these types of effects. Applying it in another sector could have other effects. So I think it's really, really hard. And basically, what I hope is that we will take the time to think this through, not rush to lay out the regulation, because then I think we will have something that is not fit for purpose. I think also perhaps we should think about soft law. I definitely think that
what is soft law? What do you mean with this?
So I think we need some type of regulation, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in terms of like EU law. We could have like codes, standards.
Codes of conduct.
Yeah, exactly. For example, in the construction and building environment, you have like codes and fackmannamässigt. Perhaps we can have that, and people will trust it, because if you don't have this certification, if you haven't followed the process, people won't trust you.
So there are many ways how we also can implement regulations, because sometimes maybe the lawyering text is not the problem, it's actually the implementation of things. And so from the statement of the text, and then how we choose to interpret it very differently, and then from how we choose to implement it very differently.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, if you just go back, take a step back and look at the law and regulation, the very foundation of it is based on that certain functions will always reside with humans. So for example, if you take the car replaced the horse from the very beginning. And now we're trying to replace the driver. And I mean, at least as I see it, the very foundation of law today hasn't really
changed from the horse even.
Perhaps not that bad.
Actually,
but I mean, it's actually philosophical questions.
Yes, and cool. But there's a couple of things here. You've said it before. Another way to give an example of this, regulating an effect or risk or something like that. We build recommender systems. And then some recommendations is to recommend which is the next song of music you should listen to. How if that screws up, what really happens, right? How do you regulate that? Versus, I will have recommender systems for the energy grid to basically balance the energy of a country, right? And if you screw that up, it is kind of a different ball game we're talking about. So for me, when we're talking about regulating the effects, it's a little bit like also regulations in relation to what's the business implication or societal implication or whatever we want to call it to get it right.
Just to clarify this a bit more, and it would be interesting to hear your opinion on this, Evelina. You brought up the EU regulation, especially the upcoming one, talking about high risk versus low risk AI, etc.
Although that's a proposal, that's still
upcoming, but in some form, probably.
But it's a direction where it's a direction.
I hope there will be some regulation, and I hope that.
But let's take the bad version that I've seen at least, which is not good, and then let's argue from that and see how we can improve it. And we don't know what will happen, right? But,
yeah.
But I think, and I hope you agree that trying to regulate the effects of using something rather than the technology itself is good. Otherwise, you can simply say everything can be reduced to if you take facial recognition, that's a technique. But if you use it to identify people to kill them for defense purposes, that's not a really good thing. So that's the application, and then you can say, they use facial recognition. Yeah, it's a technique. But that use AI. Yeah, that's a technique. But that use data. Yeah, that's a technique. Or they use math. Yeah, so that's if you try to regulate like a basic underlying technology, that's a dangerous thing to do. It should be application. That's.
But now
and I hope you can agree on that at least.
I fully agree on that. But now you said it even more sharp. Regulate on application rather than technique.
Yeah.
But one thing I think we're forgetting here, or not mentioning at least, is trust. Because we will need society's trust. And how do we achieve that? And I think regulation could be one thing. But then you have the second question, like, okay, so for like people in general, what do you need to understand about AI? Do you really need to understand how an AI model works, like technically?
Yeah. So okay, that's an awesome topic, but I'd just like to continue my previous discussion before we end up in this kind of very interesting as well, trust and understanding AI, and either having kind of internal kind of understanding how models or neural networks works, etc. But before that, okay, we have techniques versus effects. I think and hope we all agree that it's bad to regulate techniques at least, right?
Yeah, I think that would be problematic because as we discussed in the very beginning, I mean, big data is already used today. Engineering, I mean, math.
Exactly. It's really reduced back to basic math.
It becomes ridiculous when someone says we need to regulate math.
Yeah.
Like you're not allowed to do a certain equation on paper. That's illegal.
Yeah.
That sounds totalitarian to me.
So then coming to the other question, which was the high risk versus low risk, and potentially the not optimal kind of definition, which we haven't seen yet. It's just a proposal, as you said, from EU. But trying to define, some sectors potentially in society is high risk AI, and that could, for example, be medical. Right. So you use AI to try to guide like a robot kind of surgeon or whatnot, or you use it to make some kind of diagnosis or so forth. That could potentially be classified as high risk, and then any kind of application that is used or using AI needs to be regulated more than perhaps music recommendations from Spotify. But it won't kill anyone, even though it may make some people really angry when having to listen to Danish rap music.
You can truly get psychological scars from Danish rap music.
Yes. So that sounds good, I think, in theory, but I think it has a lot of issues if you say a complete sector, like medical sector, needs to be regulated more if they are going to use AI.
Well, this is not regulating application. This is something else. This is more problematic.
So this would be interesting because you are the expert in this, and to my understanding at least, it does seem like they try to regulate more of a sector rather than an effect. So basically, if you want to use AI in a medical kind of, let's say you have a system where you enter journal text or something, it has no dangerous effects. It's just a simple AI
But basically
tool.
what they say is that it needs to be legal.
Yeah.
And one thing we need to remember there is that it's not that we are living in a lawless field now. There are many laws that apply to AI already today. We have like discrimination, product liability, etc. So they say it needs to be legal, and it also needs to be ethical. And then they go through different kind of like ethical standards. It's everything from security, integrity, transparency. That's part of basically ethical. And then they say that it needs to be robust. We need to trust that it actually works and it won't break down. So what they are considering is, should we have mandatory law for different fields or different like high risk sectors?
But don't you think there is a risk that if they simply classify a whole field, like the medical sector or something, that they will be so much further behind in terms of innovation in general because they have a higher demands on regulation? Even though it may be a small part of, a medical sector, let's say that they want to use AI to simply, stupid example, regulate the ventilation in hospitals.
I think this is super interesting, and I can't remember if it was you that said this quote, but is it actually ethical not to use AI?
Exactly, yes.
Exactly. We should have that on print.
Actually.
Yeah.
I think this is actually from Kai originally.
Yeah, Kai Andersson, yeah. Because, and that actually goes back to what I was trying to say before around, like, what do we need when it comes to trust? For people to trust AI, because if we have an AI model,
you're doing a bridging now.
Yeah,
but maybe that's the bridge. Let's take the bridge. So we have gone
Anders,
around.
Your questions are super hard.
Okay.
It's also I wasn't prepared to deliver an answer to the EU Commission tonight.
Okay. In short, I think it's super interesting that we have regulation and they are formulated correctly, and I think you actually were at least the first time I heard it that. Put it into
regulate the application of the effect.
Yeah, the effects, not the techniques, nor I would say the sector.
Yeah, but
I think it's equally
But I think
dangerous.
you need to look sector-wise also. Not saying that it should be, because in some sectors you should be more careful.
But it's really hard to do that topic, because I take the example of a hospital. A hospital, you have the fundamental patient care, giving care. But if you look at the whole hospital, 80% of the cost is made up of administration, right? Running a hospital, administrating, So where do
then you
we
can use AI for the
So this is the point.
tasks.
This is the point. Where do you need to have regulation that is relevant for a business controller? Because now we are talking about typical business controller stuff. So now we need to define then the sector procurement, business control versus doctoring.
Yeah.
I live with a higher regulation in AI for doctoring, but I don't live with a higher regulation for business control of a hospital. I don't think that makes sense. So for me, then, if you take health science or a hospital as a sector, I think you're way out of line, because you haven't dissected the different areas of a hospital.
I think we should just do what you said.
Yeah,
regulate the effect.
Not the technique.
So I think
then you solve that problem, right?
But I actually have a question for you guys. So would it be possible that we have, let's say, a doctor that has AI tools available and an AI model that could help the doctor predict tumors? Is it a trade between the model's performance and explainability?
Should I start? Or, yeah?
I think you should start. I think you can take it deeper.
I think one way to answer that is to speak about the human neural network versus the artificial neural network.
Okay.
It's so dangerous sometimes that you put so much higher standards on the artificial neural network than you do on the human neural network.
So when you say
the doctor versus the AI together making a prediction.
Human neural network is
the brain.
The brain.
That's the doctor.
The H and N versus the A.
So people complain about lawyers speaking like legalese.
Yes.
Well, we haven't talked about engineers speaking
Engineers can do this
engineerese.
But so the bottom line question is, how far should we take explainability in AI?
Yeah, I was just wondering about is it a trade? A trade-off?
Trade-off, yeah. Lowering the
I would
performance.
say the short answer is no, because we even at Peltarion has a PhD student looking specifically into this, where a deep neural network can even explain things perhaps even better than humans can. This was the point I'm trying to get at, that if we have AI that's actually trained to explain things, not by looking at the internals of a neural network, but actually having the neural network as a core design principle to being able to explain if you should, for example, prescribe antibiotics, which is one of the use cases we're looking into, then you can actually have an AI system that potentially is even better than human doctors to explain why they think you should prescribe antibiotics, for example.
So you say no?
No.
What?
So the
This
trade,
is like snillen spekulerar.
trade-off. You say don't
trade-off. Yeah.
Don't deal with the trade-off. Go for the best.
No, because
I think if we do it the right way, we don't have to make the trade-off. Yeah. So that's probably one way to say it.
In your example here, do you use an AI to explain the AI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me now answer the same question.
Okay.
Because
She's turning the tables now twice a third time.
This is very professional. You had media training in Peltarion, right?
Exactly.
The ABC. Acknowledge, bridge.
Key message.
Core message. So everybody, you see what she's doing to us.
Yes.
I would answer it with another way. Well, doesn't it depend on if you think the AI should perform the whole task versus you use AI as an augmented approach to the doctor? Because if the AI is supposed to explain, give the recommendation to the patient, it then needs to be explainable in some ways, and maybe you need to be on the safe side. But if the AI tool is now put in the hands as an augmentation of the actual doctor, which is still in the loop, then then the doctor knows more detail and has worked maybe with hundreds of cases and has experience around how this AI works. So he can explain in normal doctor ways to the patient, and therefore the whole explainable topic is a little bit different. So for me, are we talking about the AI doing the whole thing, or are we talking about augmented intelligence?
Yeah, because what I wonder is that if we know that an AI model could actually save lives, do we really need to understand how it works just to understand, the transparency?
Yeah,
I think she just jumped into a very interesting topic now, which is the trolley example and saving lives. If you remember that one, I can give a quick outline for that. But in short, I'd like to summarize that kind of question that you brought. Should we or do we need to make a trade-off between explainability and accuracy? Call it that. I think today perhaps yes, tomorrow no. So I think
you're talking about techniques to take away the trade-off.
Yes, and of course there is a big difference with the AI of today and the AI of 10 years from now. But
for someone that doesn't understand the transparency part, so in concrete ways, how would you describe how a model works to make people comfortable with it?
I wouldn't just as if you asked how does Henrik's brain work. You wouldn't go in and say, this part of his brain is working like that, and this part is working like that.
Yeah.
That's not the proper way to explain why he made a decision in killing
because
a person, right?
we trust his experience.
No, but you ask him. Give me give me a motivation. Give me explanation for why you made that decision.
What is your hypothesis based on, or what is your recommendation based on? And then you will not see my neural network working, but you will see me. My neural network may identify this as a key data point, this as a key data point, and then I reflected and I crunched and I came up with this. I think it's this. So explainability should be about identifying.
It's not about introspection; it's actually about explainability. I think that's a way.
So let's be concrete now. So what you're asking, when you're talking about XAI, we are talking about. We have a deep neural network. It works, we are not following the neurons, but we can ask the neural network which one was the key parameters that was.
I should simply explain it in even natural language.
And could you give could you exemplify this now? Because I think this is not so.
It's just speaking about me. Okay, but I want to jump into another question now, and which we speak about Evelina.
I'd like to comment on this actually. Yeah. So how do you explain how air condition works?
Sorry?
How do you explain how air condition works?
Air condition.
Do we need to explain to somebody?
Exactly, but I think that comes back to trust, and I can't remember who described this example, but basically, if we have an airplane today, we have a human that operates the plane, and we assume that human want to live. So it will do their best, he or she will do their best to keep the plane up in the air and land safely. But if we don't have a human in there, if we only have a computer, how would we trust that this computer or system have this same goal to live?
But that is also strange because the pilots only, operating 20% of the entire flight.
Yeah.
Because their whole job is to just basically lift and land. The rest of it is automatically, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. But I think perhaps my brain isn't that clever when it comes to like being logical like that, because you just assume that, well, the pilot will do their best to keep us alive.
Let me very quickly, but then I really want to bring it back to like what is ethics and that type of question.
Yes.
But let me give an example, because I think I heard an interesting example of, humans can't always be trusted either. And there is a classic.
Oh, sorry. Every time some of you speak, like.
So there's a classical example of human
no
driving.
more for me.
Human driving or flying an airplane, and he basically turned the altitude meter on the airplane to basically crash in the Alps, and he basically wanted to kill all the passengers. And now the question is, okay, we know humans sometimes are evil or simply, are not functioning properly.
Okay.
And then the question is, and so are computers, of course, and machines. We so many times we have bugs and they don't really understand the context, and they are so much more stupid than humans, of course, of today. But in both cases, we have examples where things are not moving in the ethically proper way, so to speak. So how do we handle that? Well, at least to some people, there is a way to. There is the proper way, which is to say, I wish we could actually have both the machine and the human that complement each other. If the machine makes a mistake, the human can counteract that and do something. If the human suddenly says, turn down and fly into the Alps, the machine should say no and should say, this is weird. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to say no and take over control and went on autopilot. The same with cars. And I don't think it will take many years before the cars will overtake control instead of humans now today take control.
Yeah.
To suicide driving. Yeah.
Well, or whatever. No, I mean they fall asleep. They just drive to the right and for some stupid reason, and the human currently is in control, but the machine, the car, will simply say, no, I don't believe you. I don't trust you. I will take control over you and override you. And I think that's a good thing, right? So at some point, if we can complement each other, that would be the best of both worlds.
I agree. Yeah.
Now,
Evelina, you're a bit hard to discuss with because you turn the tables, you preach all the time, but now, okay.
It's good. I enjoy it immensely, Evelina. I enjoy it immensely.
I just feel a bit sad for the listeners sometimes.
No.
It's good.
So,
but we want to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, we do actually, Anders. So, but let's go to the next topic now.
And we mentioned ethics a number of times. And
I
don't think, we've spoken about regulation a number of times, but ethics is not that hard, or it is hard, sorry. It is rather hard to define what is really ethics. Do you have a preferred, good definition of what ethics or morale really is?
Yeah, that's also a hard one because that will. It depends where in the world you live.
Or does it? Okay.
Yeah, what we here in the West world think is ethical might not be the same elsewhere. But what I think is interesting, I think on a global scale, we do have some form of consensus because at least we've seen the big tech companies and other companies for that matter that have policies around ethics. And we seem to agree on a number of topics. Yeah. We want AI algorithms to be fair, transparent, etc. So I think we have some consensus around it. What I think is important to bear in mind is that when we talk about ethics, we tend to only talk about data bias, which is a super important one, definitely, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
So it's a play of many things when we talk about ethics.
But if you go back to the core question, in some way, ethics can be seen as, what is the right thing to do in some sense.
Yeah.
Do you have preferred rule or preferred way to define that? How do you know what the right thing to do is?
Yeah, exactly. So that's like the first question. For what purpose do you want to use this AI tool or AI system? Is it for a good purpose or for a bad purpose? Because if it's for a bad purpose, to kill people, then we will always say this is unethical. This can't be done.
Really? Okay. I mean, we have the trolley example. I
like to see it in like levels. So that's, at least to me, that's the first question. The purpose for what. How do you want to use AI? And if we can conclude that, well, it's for a good purpose, the intention is good.
Then you go to the next level.
Then you go to the next level, and then you can look at like, okay, so when we talk about ethics, what do we mean? We talk about bias, as in the data, what goes in. It will definitely. What's it called?
It will discriminate between different types of groups.
Exactly. So
bias is
the outcome will definitely depend on the income.
So bias is linked to fairness and diversity and stuff like this.
Yeah, and another quote: "Garbage in, garbage out."
Yes.
But then also, who is building the AI model? And today we know that a lot of engineers, developers are male. They've been to certain types of universities. So in that sense, we also need to think about ethics and diversity. Who writes the papers?
Scientific papers, you think?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At least historically, it's been men.
Yeah.
And then we can go further and ask who is sitting in the room and taking decisions. If we look at like boardrooms and stakeholders, historically, typically men from certain areas. But then, transparency, integrity, security, everything around that is also ethics. And then we can go further and ask, okay, so what would this mean to society? How will this impact society? We talk about job losses, for example. And then I think it's important to talk around like education, because some people say that AI will take my job. Perhaps it won't. It might create another job for you. And as we talked about before, if you have AI as a supplement to the humans, perhaps we can just be 10 times better.
Yes, augment humans.
Exactly. And then I think the third level is questions around singularity and perhaps robot rights.
That's an interesting one.
But I think the levels now, summarizing the purpose as such, and then is this for good or bad? This is level one, and then the next level we said some of the fundamental stuff like bias.
It's basically what the EU Commission has suggested topics to think about when we talk about ethics.
But if we go back to the first one, level one, good or bad, what's the difference?
What do you mean?
How do you know
Super
today?
Big difference.
If you let's say that you walk out from this room out in the street, and then suddenly you can see you have a choice. You can go to the left or the right.
Yeah.
And potentially, if you go to the right, you will stop a car from killing someone walking with a baby carriage or something. But if you walk to the left, you will live yourself and survive, but the child will die. How do you make that decision? How do you decide what's the good and bad way to act in that circumstance?
Okay, so you are applying the trolley example on a human.
Yes, I'm coming to that, yes.
Because when I talk about...
Should we go to that directly, or do you have... Actually, I have a good way to define what I think is the proper way to act, but I'm just...
I'm curious to hear about that, but just to go back to your question. So yes, I agree. Perhaps it's not a simple question always to say what is good or bad. No. But when I use this as an example, I mean like looking at the intention. Do you want to use AI to make the environment better.
Good intention is a good start, at least.
Yeah, but of course you have the gray zone. So let's say that it's a company that is polluting the environment. Should they be able to use AI? Well, no, if it's going to make it even worse. But perhaps yes, if it's going to use AI to do it better.
Yeah. But then we have whole industries. Fundamentally good or bad, we shouldn't kill each other. So should we use AI in the arms industry? We build weapons. We use, I mean, like some of the, I don't know how much funding in MIT that in robotics is funded by the US military to build better drones, right? Then it's a fundamentally good or bad purpose. This is actually and someone could argue, well, actually, it's a little bit like this is what you do use the gun for, that's the problem, not the gun itself. But I mean, this is, to me, clearly some of the big tech giants and even people working in industry are saying, well, I'm not going to work on your type of problems. I don't want to build better weapons.
But I think you touch upon a really interesting question here, because I think it's we tend to put a lot of pressure on tech companies in general, which I think is good, and I think it's also twofold. It's external pressure coming from outside the society, saying that you need to use this for good and you need to use this carefully, and that is super good. We don't want another Facebook Analytica scandal. But then again, we should talk the same language in terms of what is AI, what is it not. So when we set up regulation, for example, we talk about, apples, not pears, the same language. And to achieve that, we need a broader awareness around AI and sufficient education, and taking this to a broader audience. Not only the people that is interested about AI. But then if we go further and talk about like the internal pressure at tech companies, I think it's interesting to see that many companies have idealism, which I also think is good. Like the employees at the companies, they have a voice because they write the code. And with that voice, they can achieve a lot of things. And we've seen that with Google, for example. Google canceling government contracts.
Exactly like this. This is the point.
Because of employees saying that, no, we won't do this.
Thinking about the Maven project or something specific? Or
I think in general. I think
I can just give an example, because I think what we have heard about Google is they had a big project called Maven, and basically it was about using things like facial recognition, but for military purposes and being able to kill the right person, so to speak. And then a lot of employees at Google went up and said, no, this is not okay.
Nope.
We were not allowed to do this. And actually Google changed their mind and they stopped working with Maven, or at least they actually published their first, I think, version of the AI principle or something. That said, you're not supposed to use this for like defense purposes and things like this. But then they had some kind of escape clause in those principles saying, well, it's okay to use facial recognition for other things, like search and rescue, for example. So then they could potentially continue to use exactly the same technology, and I'm arguing it myself now, and that's why I'm thinking, should I even say this? But anyway, then they potentially could use the exact same technology, but for a good purpose, which is search and rescue. If they have an earthquake somewhere and be able to recognize someone with a drone, flying around and identifying people, that's a really good thing. But in reality, then they could take that technology and use it for other purposes, so like for defense purposes.
You always have your ass behind you.
I still think, what you actually said in the beginning, regulate the effects and not technique, is still extremely valid. Even in this case, even if they use Maven and they use it for good purposes like search and rescue, it's okay to do that, but the moment you move into using it for defense purposes and killing people, that's when it turns bad, right? So yeah, just an example of the I think what you mentioned at least with the Google example and employees.
But back to ethics,
should
should we go into the trolley example? I think this is a good one.
Haven't we already touched upon it?
Yeah, we have in a way.
Yeah.
But I think it's.
But you had some thoughts about it.
The trolley or general ethics definition?
No, I think the trolley. Because otherwise, I mean, one thing I think it's interesting is that, or interesting or sad perhaps, is that, I mean, in Europe we tend to talk a lot about ethics and focus on the technical issues, basically challenges and problems in general, which, I mean, it's good that we are aware of it, but what I think we need is more use cases. And I think it was mentioned in the beginning, because if we are to set up this new regulation, we need to see the effects. We need to see how it works in practice. And I think it's ironic that the companies that are really dealing with ethics at the moment are big US tech companies.
That's really fun. And just like to give some numbers, I certainly agree, and it's a very good point that you're making. I think, you know, we need to act more and speak less.
Yes.
Again, it's the same thing as we said before.
Because how we will, it goes down to really understand what is ethics. You need to also here learn by doing. You need to have the use case. Typically, if we want to regulate the effects, if you haven't even thought about the use cases, the effects is part of the use cases, right? So if we go down that path, start working on it, and then from within doing stuff, that's when you can have a concrete discussion.
Okay, so let us. I think for a lot of people, we have mentioned the trolley so many times. We have to.
We need to explain it.
At
least explain it.
At least I want to hear your thoughts about it.
Okay, so what is the trolley example?
You're not going to turn the tables again, but I can give an introduction at least, or a context for it. So the classical, this is a very classical philosophical, ethical dilemma, so to speak. So you have the problem of a train or a trolley going down a track, and the brake doesn't work, they can't stop it, so it's just going full speed ahead and just accelerating down a slope or something. And then you have 5 people standing on the track, and they can't move away, and they're simply, you know, staying on the track, and they're going to be killed by this trolley. But you are now standing beside the track, and you have an option, which is to turn a lever or push a lever, and that's going to make the trolley go down a side track. And in that side track, you have only one person tied to the track or on the track. So now you have the option, Evelina, and you are standing by the lever, and you can choose to do nothing, and then the trolley is going to kill 5 people. Or you push the lever and it's going to kill 1 person. What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, that is a super hard question. I was wondering what was your answer to it, because you said you had an answer.
Oh, no.
But
I had an answer for another thing.
Okay, but it's a
acknowledge
philosophical question. It's a philosophical question, and it's super hard, of course. And speaking of which, I was...
preaching. Okay.
No, but I heard, I'm not sure if it's an example, but when we talk about like self-driving cars, like should you be able to program like in advance, like if I end up in this situation, what should you choose?
Program as in define rules?
Yes.
So I always go for the old person when I have to choose between the baby and the old person.
Now, but just to continue a bit on the trolley, and I can give, if we just continue that train of thought, so to speak, or trolley.
So what does people in general answer to that question?
Okay, yeah. So, okay, let me give some more context then. So normally they say, well, killing 1 person is better than 5 people, so I'm going to push the lever.
And then it continues, right?
Yeah. The problem with that is you are causing that single person to be killed.
Yeah, it's an active action.
So you actually you're murdering that person. In some sense.
So before you do nothing, you're a bystander. When you pull that thing, you're a murderer.
But still, the most people, when you ask people this question, they are going to push the lever. But then you ask a second question, which is, let's say you're in a hospital and you want to do an organ transplant. And you have a healthy person with well-working organs, and you have 5 people, and you can transplant organs from this healthy person into these 5 critically dying people. And if you do that, you will save these 5 people, but you will kill the healthy person. Now, if you ask the people the same question, are you willing to push the lever and kill the healthy person to save 5 people that were otherwise going to die? They say the opposite thing. They say they're not willing to kill the single person to save 5 people in this case. And I think this is really telling, what's really going on here. But what do you think?
Anders.
It's impossible.
I'm not sure if we're going to get further with this.
Well, I think it's, I love philosophical questions.
Yeah,
that's why I enjoy and just dig deeper into this all the time. But
there's another angle on this. And it's like how I think you said it was Kai who said it first. It is unethical not to use AI. Because if we take it back to this topic now, so someone can argue, it's very scary we should not use AI. And that could be the same as I'm a bystander, I'm not going to do anything. 5 people will die. Then we start using AI now because we know we can improve actually hit rates or identifying tumors. But sometimes we can get it wrong. And then it's, so who is, so this is one angle on it. And then when we talked with Louise Kallenberg, I think we had another very interesting angle on this question. It's a little bit like, we came into the whole conversation, it's in big corporations, it's typically in the culture that it's okay to do nothing. When things are new and you should really change and innovate and do this, it's easier to say no than yes. And if you go to the public sector, that's even more true, right? So basically, if you can save all this money in the public sector, why are we never accountable for to do nothing is actually the same as no. So we act in a way that we hide and do nothing, and it becomes by choice no, right? We didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think when we come into AI and how to look at AI, and if we should try something out, and we need to be understanding that we will fail, we will have improvements. But is it actually okay to do nothing?
I think that's a really good point. Going back to diversity in tech, doing nothing about it.
Is that okay?
That's an action. Yeah.
Doing nothing is an action. And this is what I think is the key point around becoming data and AI ready to regulate and all that. We need to try, and we need to have the use cases to better understand. So this when the whole society freezes over regulation, is really, really bad, because it's actually doing nothing, it's actually it's actually killing people, or it's actually hurting our economy. And how to flip this.
Yeah.
And if we take this into diversity, and now we're talking about that we need to have quotations of, we are taking concrete actions, even lawmaking, in order, because it's going too slow.
What's the English word for civil courage? I think we need more of that.
Yeah.
That's a good Swedish word, by the way.
Yeah.
Civil courage. I don't know. I couldn't translate that easily.
Yeah.
Have the courage.
Civil
to take
courage.
action.
Civil courage.
I don't know.
Civil action.
No, but certainly agree, and I think it goes back to what you actually said in the beginning. It's better to act than to complain in some way.
Yeah.
And
do something about it.
I think you are doing that in so many ways, Evelina, and partly in, of course, AI.
Thank you. I try.
in Stockholm AI, in AI's Weekly.
That is actually listening.
But the
Civil courage. Civil courage.
Really?
But actually,
Wasn't that easy?
Okay.
but let me take what we said right now into a very concrete example. Tips and tricks how to deal with your privacy of as a lawyer at work.
That's a good
Oh,
way.
yeah. I definitely want to.
Yeah, because
three.
if we now encapsulate all this stuff, and we said we all need to try in order to learn, in order to better regulate, or in order to be safe and trust. The use case is key. So we said be proactive was a very simple tip and trick.
Yeah.
I think the number one tips that I would like to give anyone who's working and trying to do data sharing or do something they haven't done before is the fundamental framing as you did before. I think I go back to this. So all the time, if the support functions as a privacy officer or the lawyers or the risk department or the compliance department, they are there to help us and guide us do the right thing.
Yeah.
But they actually don't, they are a supporting function, and sometimes that gets forgotten how it's implemented. So basically, the risk owner, the data owner is always the risk owner. The business owner is always the risk owner. The guys at risk or legal or privacy, they don't own the risk. They guide towards the risk.
Exactly, yeah.
So to first of all understand that in a healthy company, the P&L owner is the risk owner, is the data owner, etc. And we are there to help and guide them and advise to do it right. Now, the problem becomes now when we go and speak to our advisors, but we're framing the questions in the wrong way. So basically, me as a risk owner need to take accountability. I really need to use the AI and to automate this. There is no option because we're going to die as a company if we don't do this. So the framing to the question is, how do we do this in a compliant way? Or what are the things I need to add to have then integrity, robustness, trust like this? So instead of asking like, can I do this? No, you can't because you have all these topics. Flip it, we have to do this. How can we minimize the risk? Help me. Simply by going into the conversation that this is going to happen, we need to do it, but I want to do it right. Tell me what hoops to jump through and which order to do it. I will do it, but we're going to do it. And I find here, sometimes I have been in very locked situations with this topic. No, we can't have this data. You can't share this data. Actually, I'm not here for you to say no. I'm here for you to say, what do I need to do for me to be able to take this data?
Yeah.
And ultimately, then you need to have consent from the customer. Great. I go out and get it. Here is we've done it correctly, and now we've done it. So I think this is my tips and tricks that goes all the way down to, if you take proactiveness, if you say no and inaction is not an option, and you frame your discussions with legal in this way, it goes so much better. And by the way, talk to them early.
Yeah. And I think, it takes two to tango.
Yes.
So both parties need to take responsibility.
Yes.
And coming from the lawyer side, I think it's super important that lawyers are curious and just don't say no per default.
I think you're a great example of that. So I must give you some compliments, having experienced that myself. So
thank you. And it takes courage, I must say, because as a lawyer, you're coming from the risk side and want to be sure that exactly. But I think if you can have the dialogue, and also if you are able to educate each other, I think you can achieve a path that is actually doable for both sides. And when it comes to GDPR, there are many things to think about, and integrity is key. And the sanctions are real, so you need to be aware of it. But there are ways to not go around it, but to actually find a way forward.
Yes, I think we have to move into this and actually follow up on your quote, GDPR, a masterpiece, a bit.
I'm actually quoting another person on this.
But it's a good segue, because now GDPR, of course, if we have listeners in the enterprise sector, what legal topics is very on our agenda all the time if we want to do data and AI and share data. GDPR is part of, we want to do it right, but we can't get frozen up by it. So let's go here now.
Thank you. And I think if we take a bad example, there are good examples, and of course, but let's just for the sake of argument take a bad example, and I won't name the name of the company, but let's say it's a big Swedish retailer that had a lot of reviews on their products that they sold on the website, and they could also make use of these reviews to potentially build a recommender system that helps customers and themselves to sell more products, but also for customers to more easily find products that they want to buy, potentially, if they're not shopaholics, as some people I in my family. But still, you could have a win-win situation if you have a good AI system, like a recommender system, that helps companies recommend things to sell and people to find things that they wouldn't otherwise find. So that can be a really good win-win situation. However, in this case, reviews and the text that people write could contain PII, personally identifiable information, which caused this company to say, I don't dare to take the risk with GDPR, so I pulled down all the reviews, and hence the recommender system had to go down. This is a bad example, of course, but do you see and understand companies thinking like this because of GDPR?
Yeah, I think that, GDPR works well in that sense that it actually scares people.
But do you think this is a good example of how GDPR should work? Or?
It scares people to be, or not scare, but they make people aware and be careful about personal information. But my feeling is that sometimes it scares people away for actually like trying new technology, like AI.
It makes us freeze up.
Exactly.
It drives inaction. So instead of, if I flip it, the situation now, if I go back, we really want to keep this recommender system. This is an awesome recommender system. How can we do this in a safe way, in an integrity keeping, privacy preserving way? What do we need to do?
Yeah,
and you can solve that. I'm sure.
And I think actually going back to the very beginning, I think this actually causes some injustice because big companies with big,
love it,
lawyer departments or in-house lawyers, they can manage it because they can go through the laws and see where you can find a way forward. But if you don't have access to a lawyer, and lawyers in general are quite expensive, then you take the easy way out if you have some carefulness and don't do anything.
Safe than sorry.
Yeah.
So you're hitting one of a raw nerve, where we argue several times that GDPR, the way it's set up today, is increasing the AI divide right now. The tech giants out there, not only do they have the legal department, they have all the use cases. So they have tried and tested and done the trial and error for the last 10 years. So they have case law internally, what works and doesn't work. And just to tip it off, they have awesome systems so they can basically code and do anything compared to a normal company.
And
so they have
with all
it's a trifecta. It's a trifecta to manage anything that basically puts the rest of the world in three layers below. Big problems, all three, that we can't deal with. They have the use cases and case law, they have the lawyering department, and they have the fundamental tech stack to just squeeze a couple of knobs and fix it.
And the power to challenge the law.
And then ultimately they are so big, so they can ultimately challenge the law. So how to deal with that, right? Because now we have GDPR, we have these topics. Intention is good, but ultimately where this is going is where we really probably need to put some hampering on it. If I talk Cambridge Analytica.
But do you see this problem? Do you agree that this is a problem, that GDPR is actually potentially having almost the opposite effect of what the intention initially was?
I think there might be some misunderstandings around GDPR, but if you don't have access to a lawyer, it's hard to see those.
So the intention was good. I think we all agree with that. But the consequences is not.
But Anders, we've talked about this at work because you don't really need to end up in GDPR in the very first place. You can find ways where you don't have to deal with personal information.
Exactly.
But that's not the point. The point is that companies are so afraid of it, so they'd rather be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so
then they do nothing.
Exactly.
And do nothing. They are frozen. And they are not acting.
Yeah. And that is...
It's a bad spiral. It's a really bad spiral.
Yeah, that's a problem, yes. But I think GDPR, on the other hand, can be good when it comes to trust, building trust.
Yes. I agree with that.
Yeah, and so then we're in agreement, right?
But how do we then flip it? But how do we flip it?
Let's phrase it a simpler way. Do you think the current implementation of GDPR is a positive or negative effect on non-tech giants companies?
Non-tech giant companies.
Yeah, so
What's that?
not being Google, not being Facebook, not being Microsoft, not being Amazon, but like you're a Swedish retailer,
Yeah.
and you want to use data and AI to just have a chance to compete when Amazon is now launching in Sweden, etc. Do you think GDPR is a positive or negative impact on these kind of companies?
Well, I mean, I hate to say this, but I need to say this. It depends.
It depends.
Yeah. Typical lawyer answer. But I mean, GDPR is good, but it has its flaws. Yeah. And it has been...
but okay, if so far, do you think the effects has been positive or negative when it comes to non-tech giants?
Both.
Really? Can you elaborate a bit more, perhaps?
Are we coming home tonight?
Okay, I won't push you more, but I think it's a really interesting
You said
question.
in the very beginning, Anders.
Yes.
I'm going to hold this to you.
I'm not going to put you on the spot.
This is
I heard it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to require an answer, but
Okay.
because it depends. And I mean, I think GDPR is good when it comes to building trust, but then it's not super good when it comes to scaring off people, companies to actually try to use AI, because we will need that in order to have a regulation in place that is fit for purpose.
But and could we? The last part, I think we should leave to the next topic. But to close the topic,
Or next guest.
no, not at all. To close the topic on a positive note.
I thought it was positive here.
No, but what I mean is like, it's impossible, GDPR, how should I get around it? So what do we think is simple recommendations to not freeze up?
I think we need some clarifications.
Yeah.
And instead of countries doing their own interpretations, we need something that goes on an EU-wide level.
And what is this interpretation or clarifications? What do you see in front of you? This is good.
Yeah, but I mean, on GDPR, for example, we have requirements when it comes to automated decision making. Perhaps we can have some clarifications there. Clarifications around.
Are you talking about examples, or what is the clarification that would help?
Yeah, examples.
Examples is a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And also, I think there is examples out there, but the problem is that people aren't aware of it. And I also think that the data inspection authority, which is now called Integritetsmyndigheten, they are doing really good stuff. So, I mean...
can we recommend any sources that helps guides a normal Swedish company to get on top of this? Examples, or this myndighet.
Yeah, Integritetsmyndigheten. It's the EU has groups that are specialized in this.
There's a lot of information.
Yeah, there's a lot of information.
And by the way, how many has actually read the law?
Yeah.
I mean, let's start there. In Vattenfall, a lot of us got certified. This was a hardcore big program, and I'm really grateful for that approach. That we took education on the GDPR, on the actual law text, and how Vattenfall lawyers interpret it, and how we now indeed need to act when we build systems. I find that extremely professional. And basically, when we had done that, I wasn't scared anymore. We took it seriously and understand legitimate interest, right? What is legitimate interest? And then we could understand that actually in order to run a network, we need to have data around people's energy usage. So this is legitimate interest. So here we go. GDPR is off that topic. I'm just giving an example that sort of, to really know what you're talking about is number one, I think, for more people than the lawyers.
I'm thinking about jumping into another topic.
Yeah, let's go there now.
And Evelina, I'm a bit sorry for pushing you a bit hard, just because I know you so well. I don't want to make it sound like I'm giving you an easy time, so hope you excuse me for pushing you a bit hard. But there was a famous example in Google for this person, Timnet, or what do you remember her name?
Yeah.
Timnet, right?
Which one?
It was a person that was working with the ethics departments in Google.
The ones that left.
Left or was fired or...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, what's her
Right?
name? I forgot her name.
I think Timnet something.
She was doing this work on a paper trying to identify the challenges with the big transformers.
Yeah.
Stuff like this.
And she spoke specifically about big NLP models, something we work a lot with in Peltarion as well.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Exactly. And she spoke a bit about, the environmental impact that these kind of learning of these huge models will have, and potentially also biases that may be inherent in these kind of huge, like many hundred or even billions of parameters or models have, that is hard to understand sometimes. And we of course don't know exactly what the circumstances was, and it's one side what you hear publicly, and another thing what really happened internally, probably. But how do you have any initial thoughts, Justin, about that event, that she got fired or left at Google because of potentially what she said about NLP models? You know?
Yeah, and I mean, I read the initial articles that came out, but I haven't followed the latest news. So my answer is no, I don't have enough information.
Cool. And that's, of course, good. And I'm just...
Yes, but I mean, on the face of it, it looks problematic.
If we take like a hypothetical example, or perhaps Peltarion as an example, and let's say that we wanted to have a person that really safeguard the ethical...
Have you checked it with Luca?
Let's say that we wanted to have a person that really safeguards still, ethical concerns. Similar to...
Like me, or what?
No, similar to you, yes.
Yeah.
Or like Timnet. I was thinking actually Timnet. And someone that is... concerned with that perhaps the biases isn't really being examined properly. We actually do have projects like this, so I think we're actually doing a really good job in Peltarion in doing this. So perhaps it's a bad example. Let's take a company in general.
Go there instead.
Because we actually have projects looking in specifically into biases in NLP models, etc.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the few companies actually doing that is actually we. So still bad example, but how can we do this? I just like to give a metaphor, an analogy to, if you want to bring like an AI expert or data scientist into a product team, they usually have a really hard time doing that because they challenge things. They say, do you really have the data to prove that this is correct? And let's say you have a similar kind of person, an ethical person that is, have the responsibility to make sure that we act in an ethically correct way. That's hard to bring into because they usually get a lot of pushback saying we need to push this kind of product forward with the next person very quickly. So you are also, I think you're responsible for the ethical questions in Peltarion as well. But still, do you see that kind of challenge, the problem of, being the person that potentially is blocking a bit, but still kind of safeguarding these kind of ethical questions?
Yeah, but I think it comes down to actually having mandates and the power to know. It shouldn't be only like a showcase and saying that, well, we are an ethical company. Look, we have this ethics officer. Because if you just scratch the surface, what can this person really do? And when it comes to ethics, I think it should have the same mandate as like the compliance function has.
Right.
How is this set up? I mean, because we are talking about AI ethics, and this is maybe a role that a lot of companies will need in the future. Like we started with privacy officers as part of GDPR.
Yeah.
And I can see how this is going into AI.
Yeah, it has started. Yeah.
And I would argue that Peltarion is probably one of the most mature companies in Sweden around operational AI ethics. You're doing real research on it. So may I ask, how are you operating AI ethics in Peltarion? What is that part of your role? Evelina,
Yeah.
how do you drive that as a role model for how people
Yeah.
could think about
Of course,
establishing these roles?
Yeah, of course there are different approaches, and I mean you can work with policies, you can work with processes. Like if you are to build this new model, you can have a rigorous process where you need to check
Just
certain
like a checklist,
things, exactly,
check questions,
checklist, etc. Definitely, and yeah. Sorry, I was just. What happens?
Just want to fill my glass.
the producer is filling up the glasses.
More wine. So you can have different approaches around it, and I mean we're doing a lot of research. We're also doing a lot of learning by doing, because I think that our approach is also we want to have a process that is fit for purpose. So also trying to have the ethics department, so to say, not as a blocker, but as an enabler,
An advisor,
but being part of the.
So have you framed is it so your role in Peltarion formally is you're the lawyer, but you also have the AI ethics.
Yeah, but I think it's also important. It shouldn't be one person.
No.
It should be something that is implemented.
Is it a
across.
function? Is it a function? Is it a discipline? Is it a capability?
So we don't have a department that's called the ethics department.
Probably not many will have for many years anyway.
Yeah, but I think it's important just that it works across the organization.
This is the key, right? Not to have it sit in one place, but actually permeate.
Yeah. So what we have in place right now is an ethics committee consisting of, I think we're 5 people. And in terms of issues or questions around ethics, we get together and discuss them. And I mean, ethics, it's not only about building a model and looking into data sets. And I mean, Anders, your department, you are looking into this really thoroughly. But it's also around okay, which customers do we work with? For what purpose do they want to use?
So ethics committee is broader than it's the fundamental ethics of Peltarion, where AI ethics or model ethics is one piece. Is that fair to understand it like that?
Yeah, ethics in a broad sense. And I mean, also being superficial, it's also about our brand, obviously.
Because good ethics should be good branding. You could argue that this is good business. This is good business.
Okay, it feels like I'm here to defend Peltarion, but I mean,
I think you're role modeling. This is what you're doing right now.
Yeah, but I think one really good question around Peltarion is, I mean, we are a company that want to democratize AI. We want basically everyone to be able to build advanced AI systems. And of course that comes with responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, so I mean, these are questions that we definitely deal with oftenly. But democratizing technology, I think, is key.
Yeah.
And I think the winners are the unprivileged. Because
what do you mean unprivileged?
So today we have a few players that have access to what we call cutting edge technology. And in order to achieve some form of justice in society, I think that more people need to have access to this technology and knowledge about it.
Closing the AI divide.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, science and technology takes us forward.
Yes, but how to do that in an inclusive way?
Perhaps is a good segue into perhaps another question about, we have a situation today where, we try to cope with the regulation we have and we try to understand how to work with ethics. But of course, there are ways to improve. And if you, Evelina, were to think in coming years, and if you were, let's say, someone to give guidance. I'm sorry for pushing this question. I see you Anders, what are you going to ask me now? But if you were still to try to give some advice.
Trolley example. What would you choose?
If you were to give some advice for politicians or for policymakers in, how can we make innovation still happen while maintaining a proper, regulation ethics in place. Do you think? Do you have any specific ideas of this is like good examples, these are bad examples, or is it what you said before? Let's simply build up a big like use case library and trying to find examples of doing that, and then see how we can learn from that. Or
you know what? My simple answer is diversity, and I'm not just talking about women and men, because I think diversity in terms of skills and knowledge. So bring everyone to the table. Not only tech people, not only politicians.
Great answer.
You need everyone.
Yeah.
And then I think bring the tech companies to the table.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think the innovation is happening there.
Yes.
It's not the big companies, industrial companies. And
so what, not the big industrial companies? What do you mean?
The big tech companies is now driving the AI innovation or the next generation of innovation.
so what I mean is that tech companies is driving the innovation, and I think the old players are
old
left.
Industrial. Okay,
Yeah, they
the
are
traditional kind of companies are not.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you mean.
And then I think in terms of diversity, like who you should bring to the table, well, look at their discipline. Do we have everyone involved? Do we share the same opinions? If we do that, we need to bring in new perspectives. And then, I mean, look at the boards, who sits there. I think it's too easy now that companies come away with not having diverse boards.
But actually, I love this angle on diversity, and I really think you are pushing a very, very, very important topic. Because if I go to some of the politically correct companies right now, I'm not naming any names, but big corporations, they talk about diversity, they put it high on the agenda. And I argue that they are far from diverse. They are
Even the startups as well.
No,
I mean,
and the way I see it is like we then talk about politically correct diversity, then we are meaning gender or race or something like that, right? Which is really important. But when I look at the profile in some of these companies who sits very high up in terms of diversity of skills and competencies, understanding the new world contra the old domain business model, it's far from diverse. You know, it's economists, you know, the bean counters, I'm rude now, and it's sort of the engineers of the old domain, right? That's it. I can go to any of the industrial companies in Sweden and it basically looks like that. So do they have anyone with AI true competence on the board? No. They have bean counters on the board. They might have marketing guys. They have maybe engineering guys. And I think, so when I look at diversity now, it's about different skill sets. It's the cross-disciplinary team needs to be represented in the board. So I really like when you say diversity in a broader sense than what I would call the politically correct diversity. So I'm not pulling down on, you know, more women or all this, but I think we are really quite homogeneous in our different industries. And you see it in recruitment, on the CV recruitment, that, you know, a business controller needs business controller skills. I don't see AI skills here. The same goes everywhere. So I think this is the main point of diversity that is being missed on a big scale.
Cool. And the time is almost, up, but I'd like to cover at least one more topic before we end up with the normal kind of questions. But I know you're a big fan also of women in tech, and that's something I think we all really want to promote and try to improve in different ways. And you're also an investor or angel investor in some way, right?
I've actually invested in a vineyard.
Really?
Yeah.
Swedish one or?
Yes.
Oh.
At Gotland.
I actually have a wine rank myself. But
oh, really?
It died so because of my neighbors. Long story. Cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But still, if you were to want to promote more like women in tech and perhaps even more in data and AI, what do you think we need to do? Yeah, in terms of like early on kind of education, or more in terms of how we make investments?
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
I think we need to start super early, like how we bring up our daughters.
Yeah.
And then I think we need to encourage them to start their own companies, to take on C-level jobs. And then I also think that society as a whole need to understand that we can't just put this task on the girls and women.
Right.
We all need to do our job. So, I mean, if you are a male privileged person, perhaps you can look around and see, is there someone I can mentor, for example, or share my network with, or do anything.
Awesome. I think you are a great role model for that.
Thanks.
So, thanks for doing that.
I think the role model part that you highlighted before when you talk about this is a good tip as well. Role modeling is a good way to inspire.
Yeah, show
it's possible.
That it's possible. Look at Kamala Harris, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a role model.
Yeah.
Should we go there to the Trump thing, or nah?
I think we're running out of time. Let's go to the after work.
Yes, we should. But I'm so eager to do this. Now, okay, should we have a last topic potentially? We have 10 minutes. I think it's okay. Okay, so I have to bring up a bit about singularity.
Is someone still there listening to us? Poor people.
And singularity, you know that very well, but it comes a point in time where the AI becomes, super intelligence, meaning, it will not only be better than us in playing chess or driving a car or playing Go or whatnot, but actually in a generic sense. And potentially will come a point in time where we will lose control. We can't pull the plug in some way. And then the question is really, will that be a positive or negative impact on humans? This is more of a philosophical question, but what do you think about that?
I think it's super interesting to hear what the people researching in this field thinks about it. I mean, I don't know. Will we get there? I don't know.
Do you think we will not, or do you think it's just a matter of time, or what's your...
I think there is a risk, so to say, that we will get there. So what I think is super important is that we today put resources into building AI ethically, and make sure that it's transparent, explainability to the extent needed, so that we don't end up in a situation where we as humans can control it anymore.
So the explainability and all this we're talking about, the ethical stuff, is also about not losing control if we take the singularity perspective.
I believe and I really hope that it's not a game that we have already lost. I think that if we put resources into it now and actively do something, we can control it.
Do you think it's necessarily bad if we lose control? Let me ask in a different way.
Yeah.
Do you have control of your kids today?
I hope so. They're still so young. But that's definitely something I should think about, because now my...
illusion of control.
Exactly. My oldest is 4 years, and every day I'm just like, oh my God, this is actually a human with his own thoughts, his own mind, and he's definitely going to be taller than me. He's definitely going to be able to carry me away. So just physically, I feel like I've lost control already.
And just hypothetically, if he also mentally were to be 10 times smarter than you, that's not possible. But just hypothetically, if he were to be, a super intelligent person.
Well, I'm going to be proud mom.
Yeah. Would you relieve control to him and let him guide your decisions?
Okay, I see where you're going. Yeah, if he is smarter than me, and of course, I mean, we as humans makes mistakes all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, I see where you're getting at. But okay, so what do you think?
I think it's super fine, you know, and I'm not sure if I should bring up this kind of bad metaphors, but I would love to have someone tell me what to do and say, this is a good way to act, and this is why. I would love to have someone say that.
To
me.
predict also like your future?
Yeah, why not?
But wouldn't you lose like the fun part of life then?
I can still be radical and choose to not to, but I still have the option to have the information and knowledge of
Like all the answers.
Not all the answers. You can never be 100%, but still I have more information than I otherwise would have.
But that's an interesting question. Like if you were able to find out if you if you are to like die in a couple of years.
The AI have told you have 5 years, 2 minutes and 12 seconds to
Would
live.
you really want to know
you
that?
want to know
I
that?
certainly don't want to know all information for sure. That's a very easy answer. I think some information is better not to know than others. But for some type of information or some type of knowledge, and thinking knowledge in the difference between information and knowledge as I see it is information is something that you understand what it means, but knowledge is knowing how to act. And I certainly want to have knowledge in how to act, but I not necessarily want to have all information for sure.
But okay, so let's tweak this a little bit. Like there are different views and researchers talking about how will we as humanity or people function if we don't have creativity, if we don't have a job to go to, you know, and all this. So it's almost stemming out of this whole we lose our jobs point of view. But I've read a couple of articles which are very loud in relation to, you know, we don't want GPT-3. We need to write ourselves, you know, stuff like this, right? So where is this going? If, you know, the more automated and the more tasks out there that can be done intelligently by machines, you know, what are the things that even if we have singularity, we actually, in order to survive as, you know, humankind, that we will, you know, you know, the argument is we will rot from the inside, and then we will create war and anarchy because we have nothing to do. We are destructive.
But I think we already have big problems that we need to solve before that happens, like the environment, for example. And in that sense, I think that AI will be one of the things that can help us have a planet that sustains humans in the future.
This is a good...
It's not the single answer, but it's...
No, but I think it's actually, before we start talking about the theoretical problems in 50 years, let's use AI for the next 20 years to at least
or
survive.
10 years,
survive the next 50 years. So basically we are...
I think that's a great ending point as well before we take the final questions. We do have so many societal challenges today.
Yeah.
Not, you know, not the least with the
So
corona
let's fix
today.
them first, and then
The economical, with the poverty, with education,
environment,
medical,
energy,
healthcare,
water.
So many problems, you know.
So what are the questions? Is there any questions?
So, you know, if we have all these challenges, why are we afraid of using the best technique that we can to simply solve them, right?
Yeah.
So it's a rhetorical,
It's the unknown.
it's a leading question. So we are scared of the unknown, but it actually hampers us from doing things that makes us survive. It's a terrible idea. But it's a leading question, Anders. Obviously, we should do
Obviously. But hopefully we all agree, and I'd like to hear you confirm that, Evelina, but as well that we have so many needs for being able to work more efficiently in our society today. And AI can be a small part of helping that. Right? Would you agree?
Yes, and that's why I work at Peltarion.
Awesome. Evelina, what's next in your life? In coming weeks, months, personally, professionally, or something else?
Yeah, I am actually in the process of starting/launching my own company on the side.
Oh, really?
We're in stealth mode, so I can't tell anything more about that, but it's definitely taking up a huge part of my time right now. And what I can say is that it's combining everything I've done and everything I stand for, and I can't wait to announce it in the coming months. Yeah.
Some hint or some kind of clue on?
I thought I just said that, but it's leveraging new technology such as AI to improve our society.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Wow.
We
need to keep.
We have to continue the after work to get more
Yeah,
information about this.
We
later.
need to a couple more beers.
As soon as we turn off the mics.
Evelina, is there someone else that you would recommend to come on this podcast that you would like as a listener to hear? Us interrogating as much as we did.
Yeah, exactly. So there are so many people that I want to hear here. I'd like to hear Sophie Nabset from Sana Labs.
Right.
I'd like to hear Elena Kell from H&M. And I also want to hear, I can't give you names, but I think that could be a task for you, people that have not really tapped into AI, but are eager to do it.
Right.
And to hear their thoughts, their challenges, so you can, bring them on this side.
To hear opinions from people that may not.
No, but I think
the people that we. And I think I said it in the beginning, and sometimes I think perhaps I shouldn't say it, but I think there is insufficient awareness and education among people not in the tech industry or in tech companies. But perhaps I'm wrong, and it would be interesting to hear a non-techie talking about tech and AI.
And so I think this is great because we have talked about the way to really demystify AI is to also have a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah.
So industry leaders, users, maybe even a doctor. I said I want to get my father on this show. He's an old surgeon, and he doesn't know anything about AI, but he knows about business problem of hospitals. And so actually exploring this topic with someone who has no clue but is eager and to innovate. And because it also gives another conversation and also highlights maybe what we all need to, I think it's a massive adult learning exercise in society for us to be better at speaking about these topics. And I think that's what you want to benchmark or get the feeling for, or how
and in order to approach and get to these people, I think we need to understand what their obstacles and challenges are,
and how they talk about these topics, because they use a different lingo. Good, I like it. Very good idea.
I like it as well. Understanding the challenges of people outside of the AI world, but potentially need for it.
Yeah.
And who is someone who hasn't really started but curious and wants to go here.
Yeah.
And
so not an expert. It would be interesting to hear.
Yeah. These horrible experts. Awesome. Thank you so much, Evelina. It was a true pleasure, and I hope you excuse all my horrible questions and interrogation parts. But
we will need to take this afterwards.
Yes. But I love the discussion.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I loved it.
It was awesome, and I loved how you put him on the spot a little bit. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
not on the spot, but actually turned the table.
It's interesting to hear your thoughts.
I think so too.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you, Goran.
Thank you, Goran.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evelina.